Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Rational Female Podcast. And I'm so excited today to have on a guest who I have been a big fan of for years. Her name is the Prim Reaper. Some of you may know her. She is such a positive female voice in the men's rights stroke anti-feminist space. So I'm really looking forward to having her on today. So let's just kick us right off. So Prim, why don't you tell us a bit about your background and how did you become involved in men's advocacy?
Well, my background is primarily that I am a registered psychologist. So I have been, learning and studying psychology for many years. Where I really started to get into, men's issues, ironically, was when I was studying my psychology in my bachelor's degree. I began to notice these, little messages in textbooks that would be talking about, feminism and supposed female oppression and things like that. And I was confused because I'm like, that doesn't reflect any of my real world experiences at all. So I began looking more into it. I began challenging it in my assignments. Needless to say, those assignments got lower grades from the professors, which was, I was not really a big fan of that, but regardless, I continued to fight those messages. I started to look up men's issues online and became acquainted with common problems that men face. While I was in my schooling, I was actually working in a crisis hotline, also 211 Alberta, the information and resource line for the area. And so I became more and more aware of how few resources there were for men, especially male victims of domestic abuse versus for female victims. So yet again, it was just more evidence that I found on the pile that, the men were not these, big, powerful, have all the resources things that much of my education was talking about. In fact, I saw that men were often the ones who were struggling to find the resources in need. So that was where I really began to dial in my advocacy, my research, my volunteerism, and eventually my work as a men's psychologist. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. By the way, in case anyone's wondering, I've got a bit of a cough. So, yeah, just putting that out there. So I think it's really fantastic as well because, domestic abuse against men is one of those issues that we don't hear about enough. It's very, very just swept under the veil. And it sounds like you really did, you faced a lot of pushback, as many people do. So I think it's fantastic. So when did you actually start your YouTube channel?
I started my YouTube channel in, I believe it was 2017, if I'm not quite mistaken. During that time, I was actually supporting another channel that I've collaborated with, the Honey Badgers. They were dealing with a legal challenge, and it just so happened that their court was here in Calgary, and I was able to come and support them. And just seeing them live and knowing the advocacy that they do for men's issues, it really inspired me to start up my own channel and talk about the issues from my perspective. So yeah, 2017, I've been, oh my gosh, it's almost been 10 years. Long time.
That is fantastic. So would you like to tell me a bit more about the work you've done in the men's sphere overall? So I'm guessing obviously your focus is on male domestic violence and men's mental health. I imagine so.
Yeah. So, okay. So there's a couple of different elements of this, because research wise, male victims of domestic abuse was definitely my big background. That was where I did the most research. I published a peer-reviewed paper on the subject of how to improve outcomes for male victims of domestic abuse, bringing attention to some of the common issues that come up facing these men. Examples being that society kind of minimizes their experiences or dismisses them as not being like as valid as the abuse that happens to women. The Duluth model is very widely disseminated, and so men are often assumed to be perpetrators even when they're the ones being victimized. um, talking about resources needed to either help them, or current resources needing to take their problems seriously, rather than try and be like, okay, like, are you really the one being harmed in this situation though? So my research background is that, but as far as the volunteering and advocacy that I've done with my place of employment, which is CCMF Alberta, um, we help men from a lot of different perspectives, right? We really help men who are going through relationship breakdown and divorce, custody issues, parental alienation, and then, of course, general issues like depression, anxiety, self-confidence. I do a lot of values work with the men I see in my practice, and many of them find that to be very helpful. You think many men who are going through a divorce, they're losing a large part of what they thought was themselves, right? And so many of them are having to rebuild and kind of develop a new sense of going forward and what that looks like. So, yeah.
Yeah, that all sounds very, very good. So, why do you think that society minimizes men's issues?
Well, there's probably a couple of reasons for that. The I think a lot of feminist narratives of the patriarchy and like men being in power has sort of created this zeitgeist that men are the ones in charge, that they have everything going for them, that everything is just hunky dory. But there's, I feel like, a corresponding lack of attention paid to the fact that many men are also the ones who are the most struggling in our society, right? They're the greatest number of homeless, they're the greatest number of suicide victims. When they're in need, as I already mentioned, they have the fewest services dedicated to supporting them. I can speak from experience working in an organization that targets men's needs. It's very difficult to achieve funding to support them, because when you try to secure funding, they say, why is this a group that needs funding, rather than simply acknowledging that men are human beings as well and they deserve the same care as anyone else. But yeah, there's just a lot of pervasive messages that men just don't need help, that they're the ones on top of the pyramid, so everything is going great for them.
Yeah, no, that's really, yeah. So feminists often say that they care about men's issues, and that it's the patriarchy that reinforces this, as you said, and that toxic masculinity and the push to make men have to be masculine, all of this harms them. So, what are your general thoughts on this? Do you agree, disagree? What do you think?
Oh my gosh. I could go on a whole soapbox rant about the toxic masculinity element. In fact, I have in the past. Um, the toxic masculinity whole ideology, it really falls apart when you begin to think about it for more than a few minutes, right? Because first of all, they have this idea that there is this set of traits that is basically assigned to men, and that these traits are problematic in some way, and that they should be like minimized or challenged. And these traits are often things like competitiveness. I'm having a bit of a brain thing at the moment, but it's like competitiveness, dominance, that need to be strong and stoic and in control of things. And they act as though this is a problem, and this is something that holds men back. But first of all, you can think of probably many examples of how these traits have served men positively. Men have been able to build most of everything that we see around us. They've been able to create civilization as we know it for not just men, but for also women and children and really everybody. So those traits have obviously been helpful at some point or another. But second of all, when we see these traits manifest in women, very rarely, if ever, do we ever see anybody calling those traits toxic masculinity in women. In fact, you see these traits being celebrated. You're a boss babe, right? Like, go get 'em, girl, and this kind of corresponding positivity, and it doesn't really make sense, right? It's it's not something that is associated with men. Like I think it would be more helpful to consider these traits on, like a spectrum, right? Like if somebody is being stoic to the point where they're bottling everything up and they feel like they can't share the things that are going on for them, that would be problematic whether it's a man or a woman. And I have seen that in both, But on the other hand, there is a positivity in Stoicism where it can allow people to feel like they can take charge and to manage in the face of challenging circumstances, right? So again, you can see how each of these traits can be good or bad. And if we stop just associating them narrowly with one gender, then it gives us a more complete perspective of how these traits manifest in everybody, not just one, right? But just you think about something like the phrase toxic masculinity in general, and the word toxic in itself has very negative connotations, right? So when men are constantly being fed this idea that a certain element of something that is within themselves, like masculine, of men, right, and that is toxic, it makes them feel like there's something wrong inherently with me, right? And as somebody who works with men as my profession, I see how that is negatively impacting a lot of young men coming into to get therapy, right? Like they have no sense of like, what value do I bring to the world, right? It's horrible, and I think it's something that really needs to be challenged and pushed back upon. I've had lots of research while doing my own paper that shows how that term is negatively impacting people and how people negatively perceive it. And so I really wish that we would all just collectively agree to crumple it up and throw it in the bin and never use it again.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, there are obviously biological differences between men and women, but there are certain personality traits that are universally expressed. Like there are traits that are perhaps more masculine and traits that are more feminine, but everybody has a mix of masculine and feminine characteristics. And it's true that these are generally, they are personality traits. And like I don't have a problem with saying that dominance is a masculine trait, because I don't really connote that as being good or bad. I would just say it's a descriptor to me. But the problem is that feminists, as you've alluded to, they basically shame traditionally masculine qualities and they call it toxic. And it's very interesting you pointed out that they don't shame traditionally masculine traits in women, which is why I was thinking about this yesterday, actually. I almost wrote a rant about this on my channel, but the strong female character, a character who is, just basically a man in a woman's body. This is like the quintessential feminist character, somebody who's soft and feminine and is, has her own like feminine autonomy. That's not seen as a strong female character. So it's really lame. You make some really, really excellent points. So I want to ask you, do you think that feminism has done the world any good?
Well, I think it's one of those things where it's complicated and it depends on, when you're looking at it, right? And even then, there's layers to those changes, right? Because, on the one hand, you can say that it has really opened a lot of doors for women. It's allowed women, into the workforce, and it's allowed women to kind of be on more equal footing with men. But on the other hand, you can see the research that talks about women are more stressed than ever, and many families are now having to have both parents at work in order to be able to afford anything. So it's really a flip side. I think that people who, necessarily say that, any one direction is good or bad is oversimplifying things, because there is layers of complexity to all of it, right? I do think that being able to, have more choices and to be able to have more direction over one's life is, overall, it is a positive thing. But as I mentioned, you can see how it's had some complicating factors involved there. I do think that on the whole, it has created far more negatives, especially for men. So, you can see how a lot of men are feeling directionless, are feeling disrespected, are, feeling like they have no place in society, and a lot of people are feeling empowered to just be negative to them, right? And it really breaks my heart because I get to see how this manifests for a lot of men, right? It's really very sad. So yeah, long answer, but it's
Well, it's a very, very important answer, and I agree. Like, I think, because I have a view that one may consider a bit radical, but I actually think feminism is very negative. And one of the reasons I think this is because I've read a lot about successful women prior to even first wave feminism, and historically, when you see the amount of women who had they're all like, I always find stories of some woman who had a business or was doing this or was doing that, and it's always framed as how she was somehow going against the grain. But a lot of these women weren't even feminists. Like, there's this woman now, I can't remember her name, but she was like known as the Witch of Wall Street, and she was like the richest woman in the world, and she wasn't a feminist. A lot of these women wouldn't have called themselves feminists. They were just very, very successful. And my general view is that women and men, both basically societies, were built around men and women having division of labor, and gender roles were created not really to oppress anybody, but for necessity and survival. And the reason why we have, as you said, women have more choices now is because of modernity and innovations and inventions like kitchen appliances, birth control, the technological boom. I think that all of this has actually greatly given, I would say, men and women, well, I guess more so women, but yeah, just people in general, more autonomy over our lives. And I almost think feminism ideologically is given a bit too much credit for a lot of things, especially considering how, as mentioned, there are a lot of, successful women who didn't label themselves feminists. I do agree with you that it is complex, and obviously most people would probably be very reluctant to say feminism is trash, feminism is terrible. I think most people would be reluctant to say that because it's such a controversial thing to say. And I really think that, you're doing such a great job, like with all of the work you're doing. I think that focusing on like building up perhaps is better than like tearing things down to some extent. So, yeah.
No, I think that I want to kind of highlight the last piece that you had said there, because I think in so much of the narrative right now, you hear this like deconstruction and that kind of attitude. Oh, we need to like tear down the old ways and things like that. And there really isn't this corresponding attitude of what do we replace this with, right? Like it's all tear down. It's no build. And so it's I really struggle against that, because I think tearing things down without a corresponding sense of what are we building, what are we working towards, is actually very destructive. And I think we see that in especially in young people right now, where it's like so many people just seem to be directionless. They seem to be moving away from each other. They seem to be like just not connecting anymore. Everybody's isolated. Everybody's having more, like negative mental health outcomes. And I'm like, what is the positive of the way narratives are right now? It just doesn't seem to be working. So it's, I push back against that. It's one of the reasons why I really try and have a strengths-based perspective in my practice, because it's like, what are things that are going well for you? How can we build those up and make them stronger, make them more effective, right? I think we need to take that kind of an attitude to society. I think we need to put the deconstruction on the shelf for a little bit. It can take a break, take a breather. So yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. I try to be very optimistic about this.
I think that's a really good attitude to have, and you're right, it's very needed, especially with the ubiquitous spread of mental illness, especially among my generation, Gen Z or young millennials. It's a big problem, yeah. So you've mentioned that you do a lot of like different kinds of work. What do you
Mhm.
think is the biggest issue facing men and boys today?
Well, I think the biggest issue is just the sheer amount of negativity that is on them in society. You know, they are blamed for so much. And you can see this in things like, oh, women are choosing the bear. Like I did a whole video series challenging that. I know it's awful.
It's
Um,
mother.
right? Like, um, but things like that, things like the way the legal system is right now. There's a lot of casualties from the whole Me Too movement, right? There's this kind of miscarriage of justice where people can just make any claim that they want, and men are automatically believed to be the one who has perpetrated this violence that never actually existed. It's I see so many challenges in the legal system with the clients that I'm seeing where basically their exes are able to say whatever they want, and they have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars to defend claims that are often not real, right? And meanwhile, they're having their children taken away from them. They are struggling to be able to afford the things that they need for their lives because they have to pay legal fees. So that's a big one. Um, the education system is very much not tailored to boys' sensibilities. So that is a struggle that is happening as well, because little boys are treated like defective girls when really, if we took a more gendered perspective on education, often the research shows that if boys started a little bit later than girls and their education was a little bit more like physical education based, maybe like a little less booky, they would have better outcomes, right? Like treating everybody as though they are the same is actually creating a lot of problems there as well. But yeah, I think the biggest answer is just the sheer negativity towards men in our society. I feel like there's just not a lot of direction that men feel like they can go and really be able to do well or be appreciated anymore.
Yeah, I completely agree. Do you think that same-sex schools are actually better than mixed-sex schools because they would kind of be more specifically tailored to boys versus girls? Do you actually think that's a better idea?
Well, see, I think there would be a benefit. There could be a benefit to both, right? Like, and I don't know how something like that would feasibly be implemented, but I think like there is a lot of value in learning how to interact with the opposite sex, and having exposure and being able to collaborate in a positive way. But I also think there is value in recognizing the differences between them and playing to their strengths, right? Like if little girls learn better by that kind of focused reading education, that kind of thing, and boys learn better with a more kinetic kind of hands-on experience, then I just wonder what kind of positive outcomes we could have if we played to everybody's strengths rather than tried to fit everybody into the same box.
No, I agree. I mean, I've heard so much about this, about the school system becoming very feminized, and obviously the rise of young boys being overdiagnosed with ADHD and given, Ritalin or whatever. It's just so much has been discussed about this. It's very serious because I mean, as someone who actually has had, I've had a lot of mental illness myself, I do think that overdiagnosing, misdiagnosing, self-diagnosing, all this stuff is really bad. Like, I think you have to be very, very careful. I don't think that people should I don't think people should just be like, oh, I'm this, I'm that. I think you should get a formal diagnosis, and
Mhm.
it's very, very serious. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And there's a reason why I became a like a psychologist rather than a psychiatrist. I this is perhaps a little bit controversial on my end, but I really think that overdiagnosis of problems is a serious matter in our society right now. Like when everybody and their dog has ADHD or is autistic or whatever other labels that people are trotting out, then it's really not giving us very much information about what people are actually struggling with, and it leads to over medication. And I have seen how medication can be both a help to people who really need it and both a hindrance and like a dulling of overall emotional experiences to those who maybe don't need it. And I have seen examples of people who, their doctor says, oh, you should go on like this antidepressant, but they're not actually feeling like depression. Like they may be dealing with, structural challenges in their life, or, like financial challenges or other things that are completely unrelated to like a true biological depression. It's just like being used as a cover up for actual societal issues that are impacting people. So it's really not a great way to do things.
Yep, I agree. I also wanted to quickly mention as well to anybody who's watching, I did a video on my channel a few weeks ago about domestic abuse, and there's this I found it's like a kind of all-female ran law firm called Eventum Legal. I can't remember if they're UK based or if they're in another country, but basically their clientele is predominantly male, and they largely deal with men who have been accused of assault or accused of domestic violence, etc. So they deal with men who have accusations placed against them and want legal representation because they're innocent. So that's really positive, I think, knowing that that's out there, and it's all female as well. Like I'd be very interested to have one of those people on my podcast, actually, because I think that, that's really, really, it's very important to have something like that. Because I'd be kind of thinking like, it can't be pro-feminist then, because, yeah, like I guess when I hear like the idea of like pro all female now, the problem is that anything female oriented, like I know you did a video ages ago about women's advocacy, and it's interesting because I run a subreddit called Women's Advocacy, and the idea is that it's actually a non-feminist form of female, where it's discussing female topics, but not from a feminist perspective. So without the misandry, without the patriarchy, without the grievance, more just like almost also building women up, like talking about women who are historically successful, talking about very real female issues, talking about difficult female dynamics, things that affect women. And it's really a shame how anything now that involves females is automatically placed under the umbrella of feminism. It's really exhausting.
Yes. And thank you for saying that, because it's, there's this awful dichotomy, another thing that impacts that discussion, where it's like, any woman, who's kind of like talking about men's issues, they're kind of assumed to be like, oh, like they're regarded with suspicion, because it's like, all women are kind of assumed to be like under this umbrella of like female solidarity, feminism kind of thing, right? And so, it's you get people who are, very like actually reluctant to talk to, like a female psychologist, because they're like, oh, like you probably don't understand anything about, what men are going through, right? And, I really don't blame them for being, a little bit hesitant given the kinds of messages that are so prominent in society. But, it really breaks my heart, because it's like, no, I swear I'm not one of those people, right? And I don't want them to be like going without help, or, run the risk of going to somebody who's, actually not going to be aware of what's going on for them. On another matter, like, like you said, the idea that, we have to be feminist to support women is it's really a spurious attitude. Like when I was working on publishing my paper about male victims of domestic abuse, one of the peer reviewers was like, oh, you're minimizing women's experiences. And it's like, no, I'm not talking about women's experiences. There are so many other papers. If you want to read about women's experiences, go read those ones, please. But it's like this de facto, we're at odds, right? We're not at odds. We should be caring about each other. Like that's the kind of society I feel like we used to be. And I feel awful that it feels like we've lost some of that. Like we can't simultaneously care about both. It has to be one or the other. And I think it's this very small-minded approach and this ideological perspective to men's and women's issues is pulling people apart rather than, doing what it should be doing, which is drawing attention to the ways in which we're both struggling so that we can work together to improve it for all involved.
Yeah, well, it's the gender wars, isn't it? I mean, we're living in this horrible time where men and women are at war with each other. And I really am with you. Like, I get very uncomfortable talking to other women sometimes I don't know very well because I don't know if she's going to be a feminist. And especially like in my, without too much about my past life, but in the environments that I'm in, I'm around a lot of women in my like mental health care team and stuff, and they're all wonderful. And a lot of them do know like my views, but they don't really comment too much on it. But I think also maybe because I live in London, I live in the UK, maybe there's a, I don't know, I don't know why, but yeah, I'm very fortunate that in the, I don't have that trouble. But I imagine for a lot of people who are in trying to find like a therapist or a counselor, they need mental health support, they keep coming up with people who have this feminist bias. It's not right. Like we shouldn't, it's this bringing politics into something that shouldn't actually have politics involved in it. It should be about treatment. And I feel very strongly about this with many issues, like for example the trans issue. I think that we have to have we shouldn't just be having everything being ideological. It has to be focusing on the actual issue at hand. I mean, I do things and I don't even talk, like I don't even mention what my opinions are because I'm just scared of what people will say. I have a general feeling that most men would agree with me and most women would disagree with me. That's my overall arcing thing. Even though I consider myself very, very pro-female, I have a lot of videos talking positively about women, about female characters. So I talk a lot about fiction. I kind of analyze media and through a non-feminist lens. And I have a lot of women on the show like yourself, and it's very sad because I haven't met any, I would say majority of people who are non-feminists, not maybe the nutty people who are very famous, but the kind of majority of people who are, have been talking about feminism. Most of them are not like anti-women at all. I don't think I've had a single person on my channel who I would call a misogynist. And because the social media just bombards, as you said, the negativity against men, we're bombarded with stuff constantly saying men are idiots, men are stupid. Like I'm sick. I'm actually really sick of it because a lot of people say it flippantly, like they're not even feminists. They just say it like it's a joke. The thing is, it'd be fine if it was a joke, if there was not this like cultural misandry, but it's not really funny anymore. I'm really sick of it. Well, men are idiots, but you've had good partners. Like, why would you say that? I mean, women are idiots. We should say, well, people are idiots. It's only a man thing.
Oh my gosh, I so relate to that because so many of the people that I see that are talking about, like all men are evil or men are responsible for 90% of all negative things that happen in the world. Like these are often people who, are like married to men that they presumably love, right? That they care about. They have like brothers, they have fathers, they have, people in their lives who would be like, oh, like not those guys are different. And it's like, seriously, like, do you not see the hypocrisy? Like speaking in these very negative terms is tarring a very, very wide swath of people with this negative brush. And it's not a helpful, normal, sane way of talking about people, and when you try to point out, like replace men with like
black people
or, people who belong to Islam or something like that, or any of these other groups, everybody would lose their collective minds, right? And it's like, that's because that's bad no matter what group you're using it on. Like, I don't know why this is confusing. If you wouldn't tar this group, then it's not okay to tar this group. Like I don't subscribe to the whatever plus power equals you're okay to criticize this group. No, let's be consistent, please.
Yeah, let's be consistent. And as well, like obviously people make jokes. I'm not here to believe people's jokes. The problem is that this isn't just in a vacuum, it's part of a systemic hatred of men. So like I'd be fine with making jokes like saying, oh yeah, men are really is, if we didn't have the entire culture telling us men are terrible. So I just can't stand it anymore. I mean, if we were saying women are idiots too, then it would be like equal. It would just be people making fun of each other, which is really how comedy should be. Everybody should just make fun of everybody. That's why I like Family Guy. But if it's like we have this collective, because the whole culture is so misandrous in the West, you live in Canada, I live in the UK. It's really, really ridiculously stupid. But yeah, so do you consider yourself red-pilled, and what does this mean to you?
Well, I feel like there is, this whole other side of things that, I'll be really honest, I'm not really involved with. There used to be a time where I was kind of more like paying attention to those groups, but I just kind of fell out of it somewhat. Way back when I was paying attention to it, the idea, there was this group called Red Pill Women, and the idea was just like, these are women who, reject a lot of these feminist messages, who focus on being a good partner to their men and being like, good family oriented people. And it was like, oh, okay, like there are many things that I agree with. I really love and respect my husband. He's, my rock. He's kind of the inspiration for a lot of what I do. And so, like I was like, I do want to be the best partner I can be for him. Right. But as far as a lot of, other red pill messages that I see, I think there's a lot of negativity and where the pendulum is kind of swung in the feminist way, like this is starting to swing very far in the other way and say like, oh, like all women are the problem, all women are, like biological teenagers, things like that. And so there's a lot of like negative messages in the opposite side over there, right? And, I empathize with people who, have grown up in a society that is very negative to them. They're trying to find answers, and some of them are kind of falling into these because, they're looking for answers for why they're experiencing things this way, right? But, I think that these kinds of attitudes are just going to contribute to the pendulum swing, right? If people are going into groups with attitudes like that, with, a lot of negativity towards women, then the women who are already in these feminist spheres, who are already like, oh, I'm choosing the bear, they're just going to feel more empowered to do that when they see these messages, right? So that's kind of the long answer to that question there.
Well, that's kind of like what we were getting at earlier about society, bombarding people with these messages of division. And this is the other problem as well. I would say, and I hate using this word because of its connotations, but there is a lot of misogyny within some of these spaces. And I have seen there's some YouTubers which I was watching and I got really fed up of them because they start saying things like, oh, all modern women are like this, all modern liberal women. They just go on and on. I got really fed up. Like, we're not all like that. And it's really bad. Like, I think, we can, I guess the problem is as well, like that content, they're trying to get views, right? They want people to see their work. I understand that. I completely get it. However, I don't know. I don't think we're going to help people very much, like by saying that everything is either all men's fault or all women's fault. And I guess the problem with some, not all, but some aspects of the red pill is that there is this kind of anti-female bias, but also this kind of like there's some people who go so far as they say, you have to be a trad wife, you have to love the patriarchy, and then it starts going down this rabbit hole of religion. Fair enough for people who believe that, but it just starts to become really exhausting because, what about the middle ground? Like there are plenty of women. I tried to say this when I was on Just Polly things a few years ago. I tried to really say that there are women who are career focused. There are women who, have been career focused entrepreneurs, and they're not feminists because they didn't consider themselves ideologically feminist. They're just getting on with it. And I can't stand this obsession now with saying that it's like either you're a trad wife or a feminist, either you're this or that. It's become so stupid, but it's the internet, and it clouds people's judgments as well, because the average person is seeing all this rubbish and they have a perception of what a feminist is, what an anti-feminist is, what the red pill is, and they're not actually getting to see the real people who are actually doing this stuff. So, because people have it in an idea in their mind, even something as simple, and maybe I consider this a bit personal, but having colorful hair. I used to have bright red hair, right? A few years ago. It was nothing to do. I've been dyeing my hair since I was 15. I'm 29. I love dyeing my hair because I'm very artistic. I play music, I write books. So it's got nothing to do with feminism. And I was a bit confused when people started saying stuff like that. I'd be like, huh? What? Because it's like, I didn't even think, it did not occur to me at all. So I think it's these stereotypes. And I think that, people have an idea of what a certain person who belongs to a certain group should be like, but actually a lot of people don't really fit into those boxes. And I think you have to strip it down to its ideology. Someone who's against feminism is someone who's fundamentally, I would say, against misandry, against institutional gynocentrism, against this idea that men are basically the oppressors of women, and I would say against sexism towards men, but also against the victimization of women. I don't think women are victims. I think women are incredibly autonomous. I think most women in the West are incredibly privileged. I think that the majority of women, as you've said, that a lot of the psychology work was very much geared towards women's favor. People just want to talk about women all the time. And I don't think, women are oppressed. I think women have problems and women suffer the same way as men have problems and men suffer. I do not think women in particular are some exclusively oppressed category of human.
Not at all. Not at all. Like it's such an oversimplification of the experiences that we have, and by making it out to be this dichotomy, I think we're losing a lot of honesty about both men and women's experiences. There are so many wonderful things that I have been able to have in my life, and many of them I think are partially improved by the fact that I'm a woman. I don't think that I've ever felt held back because I'm a woman, but I've seen many examples of where people have been torn down because they're men. I've been with the Canadian Centre for Men and Families for a long time now, and I have seen how our efforts have been denigrated because we're doing things for men. It's like, oh, does that mean you're against women? And it's like, oh my gosh, it doesn't have to be like that, where it doesn't have to be this battle. We can care for everybody all at once.
It doesn't, and it's really a shame because I think that this is a thing, because every time you talk to anyone about anything, somehow, if you talk about something, it ends up being a women's issue. It's making me really fed up. I'm just so fed up because I see it constantly now, because I'm talking about this all the time. So anytime I'm in a social group, or if I'm with people will just start somehow bringing it all back to, and this is bad for women. And it's like, okay, can't we just say it's bad for men and women? I mean, women are not the only ones who have body image problems. The transgender issue doesn't just affect women; it affects literally every single human being. A lot of stuff affects everybody, and it's like this obsession with this women and girls, violence against women and girls. What about violence against human beings, man? I mean, why would we ignore 50? This is kind of it's a bit like it's making everything about, it's just excluding black people. It's kind of the same thing. Let's just focus on, white people. Let's not include black people or anything. White's here, colored's there. It's it's the same kind of thing, really.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's even though I do feel certain things are starting to improve and there is starting to be a little bit more attention, it's still such that I can barely talk about an issue impacting men without somebody being like, oh, but women. And it's like, okay, but we're not talking about that right now, and that's okay, because the spotlight doesn't always have to be on women's issues. It's okay if we try and focus on this one for just a little bit, right? Like, it's okay.
I feel like I'm doing the opposite with people now. I feel like most people, they're like, and for women, I'm like, oh, but you know men as well. I actually realized this, and I don't, because sometimes memory's false. I think when I was very, very young, like a child, even before I had any like deep understanding of politics, I'd hear people talk about women, and I say, yeah, and for men as well. I think it's because like I have a very good relationship with my dad and my brother, and also I just have this natural empathy for people. I consume a lot of fiction. I read a lot, and they say reading makes you very empathetic. So I always found it a bit strange. Like, why would you? Because I was for people who don't know this, like I was a feminist for 4 years between the age of 14 and 18. And actually, one of the main reasons I stopped being a feminist was because they insist this about equality. Yeah, their idea of equality is basically ignoring men's issues. And I found that very strange. I was like, okay, if we're going to have equal rights for men and women, shouldn't we be looking at male and female issues? And I just saw a lot of hypocrisy. I got very tired. And also, I think a lot of women are really lying, because women are not these powerless, fragile beings. Women are very, very smart. I think women are incredibly socially intelligent, socially savvy. The way women navigate psychology, the whole world of women is one big power trip. It's just like the world of men often is, right? But in a very different way. So I don't buy this idea that women were all historically oppressed. I think absolutely women suffered. Women faced some severely awful injustices. I am not going to discount that. I do think that it's very, very extreme and false to say that for the last 12,000 years, the whole of human history was built on women being there and men being there. It doesn't really make sense. When you start to think about it, even for a little bit, you start to realize, okay, what about, women's going, oh, it's like these subtle things that women do. Like, for example, I'm rolling my eyes at my husband. Honey, all right, I'll do whatever she wants. Men to the left because women are always right. It's like when you start to see this stuff, you really notice it and you realize, I'm not sure that women are as powerless as people seem to think that, we always have been.
Right. And plus, like it also minimizes a lot of the challenges that men have always had to go through, right? It's like you think, I know it might seem like a bit of a trite common example, but it's like, who were the ones who were always going off and fighting the wars, right? Like men did not have this like easy peasy, like it's not like they were lying back in the sun and being fed grapes or something like that, right? It's just a very oversimplified view of the way things are. And I think it has minimized what I think should be a lot of appreciation for the sacrifices that many men have made, so that we have been able to build this society that we all benefit from. Why are we like so focused on all the negatives? Why don't we move to a place of appreciation that men have built all of this, women have contributed to society in their ways, right? Like the building families, and now yes, jobs have become a little bit more equalized, but still men are still doing the majority of dangerous and dirty jobs out there, right? And I think we need to move back to a place of appreciation for this and not the negativity that has become so prevalent. It drives me crazy.
I mean, 100%. And literally none of the things that women have today would have happened without men. As you said, as like most common sense people know, men literally built everything. Men, the house we live in was built by a man. Like in my flat, all the people that have come to fix things, the plumbers, this person there, they've all been men. And whenever they come, I'm always very appreciative. I offer them a drink. I say, like, because it's very hot now, like, do you want a San Pellegrino? Because I feel kind of bad for them. But it's like, I don't know, there's something really sick about blaming 50% of the entire, blaming like 100% of the world's problems on 50% of the population. And when feminists say men held all the power, they're referring to like 1% of people who, yeah, were in positions of power. But it's also, what about their wives? Like, their wives are at the top there with them. And the average man, as you said, was not just, eating grapes. The average man was, grinding away. The average man was like dying at war. I mean, we've been at war. Most of human history has been war, and it's been men who have been dying. So this is a very important question now. Does men's rights differ from the manosphere to you, or would you say it's all the same thing?
Well, I think there are, like different groups that kind of all focus on men's issues, right? I made a video about this years and years ago. I think, there are people who are primarily focused on, issues that are impacting men and advocating for, people to kind of like pay attention to these issues or make changes in policy or things like that. Like, for example, I know CCMF National is doing a lot of advocacy in trying to work towards equal shared parenting as kind of like the presumptive default when divorce occurs, right? Because parental alienation is a big issue that we deal with a lot. Whereas, a lot of what you might see in the manosphere, right? There might be some talk about that, but there's also a lot of talk about, like how to get women, or, how to be successful in the dating sphere and things like that. And you can take the word successful with a grain of salt, because some of it might help them be successful, but a lot of it draws a lot of eye rolls from people as well, right? So I think it's slightly different focuses, but I think all of it is stemming from the fact that men are experiencing the challenges in society that they are right now. It's all a response to the negativity that we're seeing that has been, foisted upon men's shoulders. And, when something is like treated very negatively like that, you can see some, like positive, resilient, like pushback responses, that kind of thing. And you can also see very negative, like burning down the world to feel its warmth kind of responses, right? And this is something that always breaks my heart, because people see that second group that I mentioned, and they respond to it with like, this vitriol and ire, and see, this is why men are the problem, rather than, having an ounce of empathy and seeing how, in pain a lot of these people are, and they're lashing out. And it's like, if only we were able to respond to them with, an ounce of care, there probably wouldn't be nearly so much of that negativity going on. But that is unfortunately a lot of the times not the world that we live in.
It's interesting you bring that up, because you probably have talked about this as well, but incels, because we had a whole debate on my channel about incels. A lot of these are just, obviously there are, creeps and bad people, but a lot of these are just men who are genuinely struggling to get anywhere with women. And, it's like they don't have the skills, the social skills to be able to attract women. And you have to wonder, like, when we see a woman who is in pain or suffering, we tend to feel this immediate empathy for her. But when a man is in pain or suffering, it's like, that everybody reacts like that. I react like that. We all do it, right? It's just a default feeling. And it does make you wonder, like, why do we have so little empathy towards men? And why do we have so much more empathy towards, an innocent woman? Women use, crying, feigning innocence. And it's a really is something very sinister about all of it. I wish we didn't have feminism. I wish we just had like men's advocacy and women's advocacy. I really wish that feminism just didn't exist, to be honest. I think it's really just been a terrible thing. Because it's made everything so difficult. And the pickup artist thing as well. Like, yes, a lot of these men are, they're a-holes trying to make money, but I think they're also some of them are trying to reach out men, because, women are not going to be attracted to men they feel sorry for. A woman might see a kind woman, might see a guy, be like, oh, you okay? But she's not going to want to have a relationship with a man on that basis that she feels bad for him. There has to be something about the man that makes her attracted to him. Sorry, makes him attractive to her. I said that in the wrong way. around. But I don't know. It's all really messed up. But I do want to ask. We've talked obviously a lot about men's issues, but obviously this channel is about feminism as well. And it's like, why do you think that feminism was so successful as a movement?
Well, I think there is, a lot of in-group preference for women. You tend to see women banding together and kind of supporting each other, and there's not that corresponding in-group preference for men, right? Like the research has shown that men will tend towards caring more about women as well than they will about their fellow man, right? So I think that tendency in humankind is really what kind of helped this to proliferate. You often hear that the comment is like, oh, if men didn't want to allow feminism to grow, then it wouldn't have grown, right? And there is probably some truth to that. Like you can actually see like patriarchal cultures in the world where women are very controlled, they are very beaten down, right? And you can see it there, and obviously women have a very different experience over in those cultures. But in here in the Western culture where women are kind of like pedestalized, this really allowed this ideology to proliferate, right? Furthermore, I do think that to a certain extent, like there is this care for women as like the biological bottleneck, so to speak, right? So it's like there is this certain like protectiveness drive to kind of nurture them and their needs and focus on them. So I think that can contribute to some of that. You think the difference, how that's manifested here and in some of those other cultures, you might say that it's like a corresponding, oh, we have to like protect and keep this thing, and we have to keep it enclosed, right? So I think it all kind of stems from a similar place, but either way, there is often more of a focus on women and women's needs than there is men's needs. Men are kind of considered, the throwaway sex, as much as I hate to even say that. I don't think that it should be considered that way, but that's the way that a lot of people treat that subject, and it's a real shame.
It is a shame. I mean, also, feminism itself is a Western ideology. So, as much as, the suppression of women in countries like Iran, for example, like a lot of feminists don't even bother talking about that. And, it's really strange how it claims to be a women's movement for all women, but they don't talk about, this serious stuff happening. And they just like, oh, well, it's their culture. But feminism at its core as a Western ideology for women in the West, who I think, as, were already, as you said, pedestalized and very privileged. And yeah, I think that it's just been a farce, really. So do you then think that there is any overall hope for the future of gender relations?
Well, I really hope so. I think if more people are, like able to like speak up and actually begin recognizing the challenges in a more balanced perspective, then, hopefully there can be more attention given to men's needs. And then, men will start feeling a little bit more appreciated in society, and then there will be this coming together of the sexes again. That's what I hope. But I do think there's going to need to be a real effort in the face of like online relations and things like that, where it's very easy to be radicalized and kind of pushed into like these algorithms that prioritize division and despair over positive relations. So yeah, I like to think that we can come together on this, but I think it's going to take a lot of work.
I mean, one thing that's important to remember is that humans, like a lot of people talk about how terrible the present day is, but humans have come a long way. Like, we're living in one of the most peaceful periods of human history. We are living in an age where there's a lot more acceptance of various things. Obviously, some of it has gone way too far to the other side. But the fact that, even something as simple as, you have like a white person, a black person talking, or, we have more accepting of gay people can get married. Like, there's some stuff which is actually good. So I don't see why we can't have a future where something as it seems as so rudimentary as men and women being able to actually coexist peacefully and have stable relationships. Like, all this breakdown, it feels like it doesn't need to have happened. There's a few people in the chat as well who talks about this. I want to make a big point about this as well. Evolutionarily, the reason why men are disposable, it sounds cold, but there's a reason for it. It's to do with, male sacrifice, men having to play a role, because for most of human history, societies were brutal and men needed to be a certain way to protect women and children. And women, would appreciate, you would hope, would appreciate men for what they did. And I think, again, because of modernity and modern society in the West is very affluent, very comfortable, we don't really necessarily need that anymore. Things have almost become more, egalitarian, because a lot of the things that, we're not scared that a lion's going to come and kill us now, right? So, I mean, it's ironic. We still have men doing most of the dangerous jobs in the world, and men are more like 95% of deaths at work are men. But we don't really need to be, we don't need to have, strict, rigid gender roles as so much we did in the past. It obviously doesn't mean we need to just abandon gender and say gender's a social construct and other nonsense. But yeah, the world can move forward. And I think we can have men and women having equal respect for each other again, and actually listening to each other and seeing each other as equals, not as men as oppressors and women as victims who are just helpless and weak. But yeah, whatever.
I hope that we can, come to a more reasonable middle ground with this. Like, I think that, honestly, I really do have an optimistic view of the world. I think that most people want to do good. They want to do right by others. A lot of what people are doing, I think they're doing because they're trying to do something good in the world. But I think that a lot of it has just been lost and weaponized by a lot of what's going on online, a lot of these divisive narratives. And I think just more people need to start pushing back against that and showing appreciation again, and then we can defeat all of this nonsense. That's my hope anyway. I like to think that we can do that.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Prim. It's been excellent having you on the show today. So, we're going to end the stream now. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in. This woman is absolutely brilliant. She's someone I have a lot of respect for and have done for several years. And I just think, we need more women to be talking about this desperately, because it's something that a lot of women just don't want to have anything to do with. Women, as we said, have this in-group bias towards each other. And it's like, there's nothing wrong. If we also remember, most people statistically, even though it doesn't seem like it, most people are not feminists. Most people support gender equality in the sense of men and women having equal respect and equal opportunities, but most people actually are not feminists. And a lot of people who say they're a feminist just don't understand what it means because they haven't actually looked into it. But we're going to end the stream now. So thank you so much, everybody. And we shall be live again next week with other guests. So take care and goodbye.
Thank you.